Hello, miladies of inestimable value. The moment you understand the game, you stop playing by their rules. There comes a time in every Sigma female's life when she stops looking at men through the lens of fairy tales and starts seeing them as they really are. Not heroes, not villains, just humans with agendas, fears, and sometimes terrible emotional Wi-Fi. Here's a fact most won't tell you. Studies show that men process emotions slower than women by up to 2.5 times. So while you're on chapter 10 of Clarity, he's still flipping through the table of contents wondering why you're acting weird. But here's where things really get interesting. When a Sigma female, fiercely independent, deeply introspective, and spiritually bulletproof, finally decodes the true emotional mechanics of men, her entire reality shifts. She stops falling for potential, starts reading between the lines, and watches how the entire male species either steps up or quietly vanishes into the background like a poorly written subplot. And let's be honest, once you see the glitch in the matrix, it's kind of hard to unsee it. So grab your emotional X-ray glasses, because what you're about to discover will change the way you look at men forever. And you won't need to raise your voice or lower your standards to do it. Number 1. Some men are only good at loving women who need them. Some men are only good at loving women who need them. That's the uncomfortable truth. They don't actually want to connect with a strong woman. They want to complete a broken one. Why? Because it makes them feel needed, important, even powerful. When a woman is struggling, unsure of herself, or emotionally dependent, it gives them a clear role: the fixer, the rescuer, the hero. It feeds their ego. But the moment they meet a Sigma female, independent, emotionally self-sufficient, mentally sharp, it throws them off. She doesn't need constant reassurance. She's not begging for love or attention. She has her own life, her own mind, her own emotional backup system. And instead of this being seen as attractive, these men see it as a threat. They can't place themselves in her story because she's not written to be saved. She writes her own chapters. That confuses them. Sometimes it even angers them. This is when things start to unravel. They begin to feel useless, unseen, unimportant. Not because she's disrespectful, but because she isn't reliant on them for emotional survival. They start poking holes in her confidence, questioning her choices, subtly implying that maybe she's too cold or too difficult. But it's not her they're criticizing. It's their own discomfort with a woman who doesn't lean on them to feel worthy. A Sigma female will notice this pattern eventually. She'll start to connect the dots between how loved she felt when she was vulnerable versus how uncomfortable he became once she stepped into her full power. That's when it hits her. He didn't love her, he loved being needed by her. And there's a huge difference. When she truly sees this, everything changes. She stops trying to shrink herself to make others comfortable. She stops mistaking control for care. She stops blaming herself for why he lost interest when she got stronger. Because the truth is, he didn't fall out of love. He fell out of power. And once she realizes that, she stops offering herself to men who only know how to love broken things. She becomes the woman they can't reach, because she no longer needs saving. Number 2. Men reveal more in their insecurities than in their words. A man can talk for hours about his job, his goals, his gym routine, even how different he is from other guys. But here's the truth. The real story isn't in what he says. It's in what slips through when he's not trying to impress. The hesitation in his voice when you ask about his past. The way he tenses up when you mention emotional accountability. The offhand jokes that sound a little too close to confession. That's where the truth lives, in the cracks, not the script. Sigma females aren't fooled by polished presentations. She's not dazzled by titles, cars, or self-flattering stories. What she listens for is the static behind the signal, the subtle insecurities he tries to mask with confidence. She hears the ego hidden in the humble brags. She notices how often he interrupts. She picks up on how he speaks about other women, especially the ones who said no to him. Those moments reveal far more than compliments ever could. And here's where it gets interesting. Insecure men often say too much, not because they're open, but because they're afraid of being unseen. So they overcompensate, they exaggerate, they perform. And while most people hear charm, a Sigma female hears panic. Not obvious, loud panic, but that deep, quiet discomfort that only shows up when someone hasn't made peace with who they really are. She learns that a man's words are sometimes armor, and that the more armor he wears, the more likely he's hiding wounds he hasn't touched. This doesn't make him bad, it makes him unready. And once she understands this, she stops getting pulled into conversations that sound good, but feel off. She no longer responds to flattery with curiosity. She responds to patterns with precision, because now she knows. The bravest men are the ones who are secure enough to not oversell themselves, and when she meets one, she'll hear it not in his speech, but in his silence. Number 3. Many men don't want a partner, they want a mirror. A lot of men don't actually want a partner, they want a mirror. Someone who reflects their strengths, validates their opinions, praises their every move, and exists to affirm the version of themselves they want to believe in. They aren't looking for a woman with her own identity. They're looking for someone who will orbit around theirs. For a Sigma female, this becomes painfully obvious over time. At first, everything seems fine. He's interested, supportive, even admiring. But slowly she starts to notice that the moment she expresses a strong opinion that contradicts his, there's tension. If she wins at something, instead of celebration, there's silence. If she talks too long about her goals, he subtly shifts the focus back to him. It's never obvious, but it's always there. The unspoken expectation that she shrink just a little so he can shine a little more. She starts to realize he was never clapping for her. He was clapping for the parts of her that applauded him, and when she begins to truly own her power, when she starts showing up fully, shining without apology, that's when he starts pulling away. Suddenly she's too intense, too focused, or not the same anymore. But she hasn't changed. She's just stopped performing. She stopped playing the mirror. That's the moment everything clicks. She sees that his love was conditional, not on who she was, but on how well she reflected his ideal image. And instead of feeling rejected, she feels released. Because now she knows. Rejection from someone who needed her to dim herself isn't loss. It's liberation. She stops fearing being too much and starts realizing he was simply too little to handle it. The desire to be accepted gets replaced by the clarity to walk away. She doesn't explain her light. She just takes it elsewhere, where it doesn't need to be softened to be seen. And from that moment on, she stops being a mirror and becomes the fire that either warms or burns, depending on who's standing close. Number 4. Men who are intimidated by her are already beneath her energy. When a Sigma female fully steps into her power, she starts noticing a pattern. Some men don't lean in, they lean away, not because she's rude, aggressive, or emotionally closed off, but because her presence alone makes them feel exposed. Her confidence threatens their control, her clarity unsettles their confusion. Her independence reminds them of their own inner dependence. And so, they quietly disappear, come up with excuses, or try to shrink her with backhanded compliments like, "You're just too much." But here's the twist. She doesn't take it personally anymore, because now she sees it for what it really is: spiritual filtration. Her energy is doing the screening, her frequency is doing the work. He didn't walk away because she was hard to love. He walked away because his ego couldn't survive in a space where it wasn't constantly being fed. She stops overanalyzing why they ghosted, withdrew, or got cold. That's not heartbreak, that's clarity, because any man who is intimidated by her is already beneath her energetic standard. She's not going to dim herself for someone who's too small-minded to handle a woman with a spine, a soul, and standards. Before, she may have tried to be softer, quieter, nicer, to seem more approachable. But now, she understands that any man who needs her to shrink in order to stay was never strong enough to stand beside her in the first place. Her presence naturally repels the fragile, the performative, and the emotionally unavailable. It's not rejection, it's divine alignment. The kind of man who's meant for her won't feel threatened by her power. He'll respect it, he'll rise to meet it. So she doesn't chase, she doesn't question, and she definitely doesn't downplay herself. She simply stands tall, walks forward, and lets her frequency do what it was always meant to do: filter out the weak and attract the worthy. Number 5. A man who sees her as his equal will never try to own her. At first, it's hard to tell the difference between being cherished and being controlled. They both start with attention, care, and the illusion of safety. But over time, the truth reveals itself in small, unsettling ways. The man who sees her as something to possess will slowly begin to tighten his grip. He'll question her independence, make subtle comments about how she dresses, who she talks to, or how much time she spends on her passions. It's not love, it's management. It's not partnership, it's ownership dressed in affection. And for a while it may confuse her, because it feels like protection. It sounds like love. But something deep within starts to feel off, like her wings are being wrapped in velvet chains, not bruised, just bound. That's when her soul starts whispering louder than her heart, because the heart can be tricked by words, but the soul always recognizes when it's being caged. The man who sees her as his equal, though, he doesn't flinch at her freedom. He doesn't panic when she shines. He doesn't mistake her strength for rebellion. He doesn't need to own her because he's secure enough to walk beside her, not ahead of her. He respects her autonomy, celebrates her brilliance, and never tries to dim what he admires. She learns that real love doesn't ask her to shrink. It doesn't make her question whether she's too much. It doesn't guilt her for being deeply committed to herself first. The difference becomes clear not in the big moments, but in the daily energy. Does she feel free or confined, empowered or monitored, encouraged or edited? Once she tunes into that frequency, everything changes. She no longer settles for love that costs her pieces of herself. She chooses a connection where she can expand, evolve, and breathe. Not because she needs to be worshipped, but because she deserves to be witnessed as a whole being. And once she experiences that kind of respect, control becomes laughably small. She doesn't fight to be chosen. She chooses herself and only welcomes those who recognize she was never theirs to own in the first place. Number 6. Men will pretend they want depth, but panic when they find it. A lot of men claim they want a deep, emotionally intelligent woman. They say things like, "I love a woman who's in touch with her feelings," or "I just want someone real." But what they often really mean is, "I want depth that doesn't challenge me, vulnerability I can control, softness that doesn't expose my own emotional avoidance." They want curated depth, not the raw, unfiltered kind that requires them to look inward too. So when a Sigma female shows up as she truly is, unapologetically open, emotionally aware, soulfully complex, they start to glitch. Not because she did anything wrong, but because her emotional presence exposes their emotional absence. It's not cute anymore, it's confronting. Her honesty becomes overwhelming, her clarity becomes uncomfortable. Suddenly she's too intense, too emotional, or too deep. But what's really happening is, they're drowning in waters they claimed they could swim in, and this is where her vision sharpens. She begins to recognize the difference between a man who's curious about emotions and one who's ready to hold space for them. Between a man who listens to reply and a man who listens to understand. Between those who want her light and those who can sit with her shadows. She stops explaining her emotional language to people who only speak ego. She stops lowering her emotional volume to make men feel less exposed. She doesn't punish herself for their emotional immaturity. She simply understands not every man deserves access to her inner ocean. Because vulnerability isn't a performance, it's a sacred exchange. And once she sees that many men only ask for it because it sounds good, she stops handing it over like a party favor. Her emotional depth becomes a gift, not a given. Something that must be earned, not extracted. Not everyone can handle the deep end, and she's finally okay with that. Because she's done playing in puddles with people who panic when the water gets real. Number 7. Alpha males aren't threats. They're performance artists. Alpha males like to walk into rooms like they own them. Loud confidence, power stances, firm handshakes, designer watches, and that perfectly timed smirk. To most people, it looks like dominance. To a Sigma female, it looks like theater. Not because she's unimpressed by success, but because she's trained herself to look past the costume and into the character. And what she often finds behind the curated persona is fear, not strength. She starts seeing the patterns, The ones who speak the loudest often have the most to prove. The ones who flex the most power often fear losing control. It's not masculinity, it's performance art. Status becomes their drug. Validation is their oxygen. Every move is a calculated PR campaign to appear untouchable, alpha, and always in charge. But it's all surface. And once she sees it, it can't be unseen. She stops romanticizing the so-called alpha. She stops being pulled in by the dominance masked as leadership. She stops confusing attention for connection. What used to seem magnetic now feels exhausting because she knows what's underneath it. A deep need to be constantly affirmed, admired, and obeyed. A Sigma female isn't attracted to authority for its own sake. She's drawn to substance, to men who have no need to perform, men who don't need to prove power because they're comfortable with who they are in silence, men who speak less but mean more, who aren't obsessed with being seen but are grounded enough to stand unseen and still feel whole. The louder the flex, the weaker the core, it becomes obvious. So while everyone else claps for the alpha's show, she's in the back of the room quietly observing the cracks, because she knows real strength doesn't posture, it simply exists. And real connection doesn't demand a spotlight. It builds in the shadows where no applause is needed. She no longer mistakes confidence for character, and in doing so, she levels up her taste, not to someone more powerful, but to someone more real. Even if he's quiet, obscure, and unseen by most, he'll never need to perform for her. And that's what makes him unforgettable. Number 8. Men know how rare she is. They just hope she doesn't. Men know exactly how rare a Sigma female is. They just quietly pray she doesn't realize it. Because the moment she does, everything shifts. She stops bending, shrinking, or over-explaining. She no longer tries to be more approachable or easier to handle. She doesn't tolerate crumbs, mixed signals, or the illusion of love that demands her silence. And that terrifies the kind of men who only thrive when a woman doesn't fully know her worth. The world has always run more smoothly when powerful women second-guess themselves, when they internalize doubt, when they're convinced they need to be more patient, more forgiving, more accommodating. But once a Sigma female fully wakes up to her own frequency, she realizes that the game was never fair. It was always designed to keep her distracted from herself. Her self-awareness is the real currency. It's what makes her emotionally bulletproof, psychologically untouchable, and spiritually sovereign. Because when a woman knows who she is, she stops asking others to define her. She becomes her own mirror, her own compass, and her own source of validation. Men who once tried to manipulate her now find they have no leverage. The tactics that used to work, disappearing to create anxiety, playing hot and cold, love-bombing, guilt-tripping, bounce off her like dull arrows. She doesn't chase, she doesn't beg, and she definitely doesn't entertain energy that feels confusing. If it's not clear, she clears it. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. She no longer fears being alone because she understands that solitude is not punishment. It's power. And men can feel it. The ones who once hovered thinking she'd stay unsure forever now sense the shift. They realize they can't play her anymore. Not because she got colder, but because she got clearer. Clear on who she is. Clear on what she deserves, clear on what she'll never tolerate again. And once she reaches that level of clarity, she becomes unplayable. Not because she's guarded, but because she's awakened. And once a woman awakens to her rarity, to her energy, to her divine weight in this world, the game ends. She doesn't play it, she becomes it. Number 9. Men will try to intellectualize her emotion, so they don't have to feel theirs. Many men are uncomfortable with emotions, not just her emotions, but emotions in general. When a Sigma female expresses something deep, raw, or vulnerable, some men immediately jump to intellectualize it. They dissect her feelings with logic like it's a puzzle to be solved instead of an experience to be respected. Calling her irrational, too sensitive, or overreacting isn't about her. It's their way of avoiding the storm inside themselves. They don't want to feel their own buried fears, insecurities, or pain, so they project those fears onto her. By labeling her emotions as too much or illogical, they create a safe distance. It's easier to dismiss than to dive in. It's simpler to debate than to empathize. This tactic is gaslighting in its rawest form, not always with malicious intent, but with self-preservation at its core. Once she realizes this, she stops doubting herself. She stops trying to shrink or mute her emotional reality to fit into their comfort zones. She stops policing her own feelings to make them more acceptable. Because the problem never was her emotions. It was their inability or unwillingness to hold space for them. Instead of questioning her sanity, she begins to question their emotional capacity. She notices how often they switch from engagement to detachment when things get real, how often they hide behind intellect as armor, how often they retreat when vulnerability is required. This understanding shifts her power. She no longer carries the burden of making them feel safe. She no longer expects their emotional maturity to match hers. She doesn't apologize for being complex or deep. A man who truly respects her won't dismiss her feelings to protect his ego. He'll listen, absorb, and hold her without judgment. He won't run from the chaos she carries because he's learned to manage his own. So, when she encounters the intellectualizers, she sees them clearly. Not as weak or broken, but as emotionally unavailable. And she quietly walks away knowing her emotions deserve a home, not a courtroom. Number 10. A man's relationship with his mother will echo in yours. A man's relationship with his mother isn't just some cliché psychoanalysis. It's a real practical blueprint for how he's wired to relate to women, especially in close relationships. It shows up not in neat, obvious ways, but in the way he sets or ignores boundaries, how he handles emotional responsibility, and the style he uses to communicate or avoid it altogether. If his mother was someone who didn't respect her own limits, he's likely grown up watching emotional chaos disguised as normal. That means he might expect the women in his life to pick up the slack, to read between the lines endlessly, or to sacrifice their own needs to keep the peace. On the other hand, if his mother was fiercely independent but emotionally distant, he might struggle to open up or connect on a deeper level because vulnerability wasn't modeled for him as safe or valuable. Charm can be his best camouflage. Early on, he might seem attentive, funny, and smooth, someone you'd want to bring home to meet the family. But a Sigma female learns to see through this surface. She watches how he handles disagreements, whether he respects her time and energy, and if he truly listens or just waits for his turn to talk. Patterns emerge quickly. Does he deflect responsibility? Does he expect her to do the emotional heavy lifting? Does he communicate clearly or leave her guessing? These aren't random behaviors. They're echoes of what he learned at home. When she understands this, she can predict his moves with startling accuracy. She knows if he'll shrink from conflict or bulldoze through it, if he'll honor her boundaries or test them, if he's genuinely present or just physically there. That insight gives her power, not to fix him, but to decide if she wants to stay in a script that's already been written for her. Because once she sees his relationship with his mother reflected in his actions, she no longer wastes time hoping he'll be someone he's not. She moves with clarity, knowing some roles are simply impossible to rewrite, and that in itself is freedom. Number 11. Some men want to be chosen just to prove they could be. Some men chase not because they truly want a partnership, but because they need the validation of being chosen. It's less about who she is and more about what she represents. A prize, a symbol of their worth, a trophy to showcase. For these men, the pursuit is a game of ego, a contest to prove they can win, not to build something real or lasting. A Sigma female learns to spot this early. The flashy compliments, the grand gestures, the sudden surge of attention, all feel exciting but lack depth. She notices that their actions often stop at surface level. Consistency becomes a performance rather than a commitment, and attention is nothing more than a spotlight to boost their own image. They aren't interested in her complexities, her growth, or her boundaries. They want the status of having her on their arm, the bragging rights to say, "I got her." But when the initial thrill fades, so does their interest. Because their desire was never for her, it was for themselves and the reflection she gives them. Once she senses this, she stops confusing the show for substance. She no longer mistakes being pursued for being valued. She recognizes that real intention doesn't need fanfare or proof. It's steady, quiet, and respectful, even when no one's watching. This awareness saves her from wasting energy, time, and heartbeats on men who are players in their own story, not co-authors in hers. She chooses instead those rare few who want to build, not just claim, a connection. Because for a Sigma female, being chosen is powerful, but being valued is everything. Number 12. Men who truly see her will also challenge her. Men who truly see a Sigma female don't just accept her as she is, they push her to become more. But this challenge isn't about control or dominance, it's about expansion. It's the kind of challenge that respects her boundaries while encouraging growth. It's a rare energy because most men shy away from a woman who refuses to be boxed in or told what to think. When a man genuinely values her, he understands that challenging her isn't about tearing her down or proving his power. Instead, it's about engaging her mind, questioning her ideas, and inviting deeper conversations that stretch both of them. He isn't threatened by her intelligence or her independence. Instead, he celebrates it. He knows that growth comes from uncomfortable questions and honest feedback, not empty praise or passive agreement. For a Sigma female, this shift is revolutionary. She stops fearing confrontation or criticism because she recognizes the difference between disrespect and genuine challenge. Being called out no longer feels like an attack but an opportunity. She begins to demand it, not because she craves conflict, but because she craves clarity and evolution. When a man dares to question her respectfully, it proves he respects her enough to engage on a deeper level. This dynamic also filters out those who are intimidated by her mind. Men who fear her strength or intelligence will avoid challenging her, not because they are kind or considerate, but because they're afraid of losing control or feeling inferior. Those men stay quiet or use passive tactics, which only limits the relationship's potential. On the other hand, men who rise to the challenge bring authenticity, growth, and a mutual respect that transforms the connection into something rare and powerful. They don't just see her surface brilliance, they see the layers beneath and they want to explore them together. For the Sigma female, this means she no longer settles for shallow admiration or hollow compliments. She values men who inspire her, question her, and push her toward becoming the fullest version of herself. Because true respect isn't about agreement, it's about the courage to engage honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. In the end, the men who challenge her respectfully are the ones who stand beside her as equals, partners in growth, not opponents in power. And that is the kind of connection she refuses to compromise on. Once a Sigma female truly understands these deeper truths about men, the hidden layers beneath their words, the fragile ego games, the silent wounds masked by humor, everything changes. She no longer approaches relationships as a guessing game or a battle of wills, but as a complex dance of energies, vulnerabilities, and unspoken needs. This understanding grants her unprecedented clarity and power, not to control or manipulate, but to choose wisely and move with intention. She stops being fooled by surface-level charm, shallow consistency, or empty words because she knows where to look and what to listen for. She recognizes that real connection requires courage from both sides to be seen fully and honestly, without masks or pretenses. And she refuses to settle for anything less than that kind of raw, authentic engagement. This awakening reshapes her entire approach to intimacy. She no longer fears being challenged or called out, knowing that true growth springs from honest confrontation rather than comfort zones. She respects her own boundaries fiercely and sees the men who respect them in return as rare treasures. She understands that not every pursuit is sincere, not every compliment a genuine invitation, and not every man ready to walk beside her on the path of mutual expansion. Most importantly, she stops dimming her light to make others comfortable. Instead, she shines brighter, unapologetically, and in doing so, she filters out those who cannot handle her frequency. This filtering isn't about arrogance. It's about survival, clarity, and self-respect. It's about honoring the fullness of who she is and refusing to be reduced to someone else's reflection or trophy. In a world that often rewards conformity and quiet submission, the Sigma female's journey to understanding men on this profound level is a radical act of empowerment. It's a reclaiming of her sovereignty, her voice, and her truth. And once she steps fully into this knowing, she becomes unshakable, unplayable, unstoppable, and undeniably magnetic. Because she moves through life not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a force to be reckoned with, guided by wisdom, intuition, and the fierce clarity that only comes from truly seeing. That is the ultimate transformation. That is her power. And nothing will ever be the same again. If this resonated with you and you want to dive deeper into understanding yourself, relationships, and the unspoken dynamics that shape our lives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button to let me know you're here for real talk and meaningful insights. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and your experiences might just be the spark someone else needs to hear. And if you know someone who needs this clarity, don't hesitate to share this video with them. Together, we're building a community of strength, awareness, and unapologetic authenticity. So stay connected, stay curious, and let's keep unlocking the truths that most won't dare to face. Your journey to empowerment starts here. Subscribe, engage, and let's grow unstoppable.